you don't think roof venting works. How do you feel about vapor diffusion boards?
I think it's wacky, frankly. But, like science is science, so if it's been demonstrated to work, I can't argue with that, but... Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editorial Director Andrew Zellner.
Morning, Patrick.
Fine Homebuilding Editorial Advisor Mike Girton.
Hello, gents.
And our fine producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at fineopening.com/podcast. Well, it's good to see you guys this morning. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
What have you been doing, Mike?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, yesterday afternoon, again, planning to be going away soon. I was doing rounds around a couple of rental houses just to check them out, looking for leaks and things. And I went into the well area of a basement at one property, and there was a little water. And not that it matters because there's, it's got a dirt floor in that little underground chamber. But it worried me, and I noticed there's an elbow, a nylon barbed fitting elbow, and I had tried fixing it in the spring, and I thought I was just tightening the hose clamps, but it wasn't. It's actually got a little crack on the inside corner. So I went scrambling around trying to find, I went to two places to find the fitting.
Let me back up here first. So did you have a local hardware store, I'm guessing, and you tried there first?
Yep. I went to a local hardware store, and then I went to another local hardware store, and then I said, the heck with this. I pulled out my phone, and I can usually, most of these places you can search and see if they have things in stock. And I found a place in stock, and then I went.
A home center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't a nice nylon one, which I prefer. It was it's a hard plastic. I don't even know what the plastic is. But anyway,
I'm told
it'll work.
that you should buy brass or stainless for that stuff,
Yeah.
right? If you can, but that's hard to find because it's expensive.
And they don't stock those kind of things. If I had a bigger building, I could stock two of everything. Have my own hardware store in my backyard. But that's a little too far to go.
At least it was an easy fix, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 15, 20 minutes once I had the part. It took 45 minutes to find the part.
I really like the idea of you having a hardware store, Mike, at some point. I would be an avid shopper. I've won, I peruse online auction stuff, and I've won a couple of bolt bin sorts of things, but the stipulation is, you get these bolt bins for $5, but you have to take everything that's in them. And so I've got all the bolts I need for the rest of my life.
So when you say online auction, do they have to mail these things to you? Do they mailing you 20 pounds of bolts through UPS?
So there's a couple of online places that often have auctions in the greater metro area of the Twin Cities. And I keep an eye on those because, folks are retiring all the time and don't want to have to deal with moving, a 2,000-pound 3-phase joiner, to their retirement property. So
what other notifications do you get with local auction stuff?
I'm mostly on the hunt for, basically I'll click on anything that's shop closing or shop moving, and it's not just woodworking, but there's a lot of metalworking stuff. I lost out on some really cool flat files from a print shop that was moving recently. Because I want a lot of tiny drawers to organize my stuff, but I don't want to pay tiny drawer prices in 2022.
The smaller the drawer, the higher the price is what I've observed. Yeah. Well, it's too bad because there's like tons of that stuff around the Taunton offices, right? Like if you could, maybe have your tools shipped to Newtown, you could use them when you're here, right? Jeff, what have you been doing?
Not a whole lot.
You haven't gotten to your railing, I'm guessing.
No.
You're waiting for the ice storm, right?
Are you guys getting an ice storm?
Yeah, we're supposed to get mixed precipitation. I got a notification from the electric utility this morning that we should expect prolonged power outages that might last into the weekend. So I was like, great, that's awesome.
Yeah. I think we'll be okay in the Twin Cities, but I've got some friends up north that were like filling their bathtubs with water and like stocking their fireplace. Because we got a storm last week that stuck to all the trees, and then it went like below zero, and so none of that snow was melted. And up by Duluth, I think they're planning on like 20 inches of snow or something crazy. Yeah.
Carol and I were talking about it recently. When we lived in northern Vermont, snow was just normal, right? It wasn't like a big deal. Do you feel that way about where you live, Andrew?
I do. It feels like my house. It's in the city, and Jill's dad works for our local Excel Energy, so like we've got a guy on the inside. If we do lose electricity, we can at least find out when we're going to get it back and plan accordingly. So like the snow is just like like what we do anyway. Like you've got a snowblower and you plan on either getting up early or like sneaking out of work at lunch to take care of your snowblowing obligations. But it's really like it's sort of like we've reached a point where all of the trees in the city are at this age where, they're urban trees and they may be nearing the end of their lives. And then we get these snow events and we still have all these above ground power lines, and it can get pretty messy pretty quickly with the right storm.
Sure. And if the temperatures are really low, the risk is greater, right? Because if your house freezes up, then ruptured pipes and and people, complain about, rain or whatever, right?
What have you been up to, Patrick?
Well, I finished, putting the soffits on the barn and cleaning the siding. I got that all put back together, and I did set up a scaffold, Mike. I was thinking of you, and I was like, I want to be ready if I get a 40-plus day to work on the house. So I'm ready when we get a little good weather, and shouldn't be a big deal. It's much lower than the gable ends of the barn, right? I'm at 5 feet off the ground instead of 15. So yeah, way different, right?
Yeah.
I was talking to my friend Rob Watzak this morning on Facebook about building cabinets, and what do you guys have you had to make cabinets for yourself, Mike, Andrew, Jeff, and I'm guessing you guys would agree that it's a pretty good bang for the buck project.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I made all of my kitchen cabinets. I don't think I saved money, but they're much nicer cabinets than anything I could have afforded to have somebody else make for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. You get way better cabinets. Yeah. Are you like, how do you put your boxes together, Andrew, the cases for the cabinets and the drawer boxes?
So pre-finished plywood for the cabinet cases. There was a screaming deal at Menards when I was buying my material. And then just screw everything together, staple on a back, and then use pocket holes on the outside of the cabinet box to attach hardwood face frames. I feel like if I make cabinets again, I would actually pursue a frameless setup rather than face frames.
Why do you say that?
Well, I also inset all of my doors and drawer fronts, and it gets pretty fiddly, and the room for error decreases significantly. So like even if I didn't go frameless, I would do like a full overlay or partial overlay door and drawer front.
Because you have huge temperature and humidity swings seasonally, right? I'm guessing that complicates that too.
It complicates it a little bit. So because I built my own cabinets, the one thing I did was like the most important or the most expensive part of it was buying all the hardware. So I've got nice Blum undermount drawer slides and European hinges that are super adjustable. So that made it easier, but I would want to make it easier even more if I did it again.
What do you think, Mike? He's got the right approach?
I think you end up I can see where you spent more money because you're going for those higher end features that if you were going to buy cabinets and get all of the nice hardware and super adjustable hinges, you're going to pay a premium for them. So I think really you end up saving money. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, net
That's
for
what I
net.
keep telling myself.
Yeah, and you're having fun doing it. I mean, that's what you really do it for. Isn't so much that you need the cabinets as much as you may need the cabinets, but it's just the joy of working with all that stuff and then standing back when you're done and saying, "I built that." Rather
speak
than,
for yourself.
That cost
I get
me
no joy out of it.
The one thing I did run into was like I didn't have room because my shop is in my garage to store an entire kitchen's worth of cabinets. So, you build a few and you install them and then the cabinets get better as you go. But if I were to do it again, I would make the room to build all the cabinets and then install them all together.
It takes up a phenomenal amount of room, really. Yeah.
Really
So I
does.
take a completely different approach. I don't build. I do it the old school way, where you actually, for a built-in cabinets, I build the cabinets in. So I don't have all the adjustments that you would with the cabinets, with the building boxes like you're doing for all the shelves. But I put cleats on the wall, and then build it from the wall out, and then putting the face frames on, and then the doors. So one of the advantages I found is that I don't have all of those dividing panels. Whatever it's 24, 36, whatever your nominal distance would be between those cabinet boxes. And I've got one, it's a 12-foot long run. And then I just put in some intermediate supports where needed, but pretty much everything works. The shelves end up being structural in that case.
That's a very Yankee construction technique for a number of reasons. I'm sure you guys don't need me to say what they are.
Yeah, it's cheap. It's framing lumber and some finished lumber that you see on the outside. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's a great approach. And that's the reason the carpenters did it 100 years ago, right? Because they were building cabinets, not they needed to save money too.
There was a local builder in our area whose homes even now, when they go on the market, it's always it's a name brand. People look back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s when he was building, and even right through the end of the 80s, and even a little into the early 90s, his crews would build all the cabinets in place with cleats on the wall and all of that. They also used pine planks for all the roof sheathing, and they never modernize their techniques from when he locked it in the 1950s.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Patrick, you did an article on RTA cabinets, which I think is a good in between building your own and buying off the floor.
Absolutely, and once again, the cost savings is huge, but it does take a lot of time. But for folks like us doing our own projects, I got more time than money in many cases. I think it's a fantastic solution.
Yeah.
This comes from Chris in Chicago. Found your discussion in episode 519 about codes and getting them changed and why they are like they are interesting. Here in Chicago and a couple other counties, the codes are heavily influenced, if not outright written, for the unions as far as the MEP trades go. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing, I'm guessing. Romex, BX, PVC, PEX, shark bites, press fittings, flare fittings, flex duct, and most everything else that became standard for all the other 99 counties in Illinois and the rest of the country decades ago are not allowed. I'm guessing New York, excuse me, guys, LA and some other large cities in the U.S. may be the same. I don't know. I remember my father wiring and piping a summer A-frame he bought in Wisconsin with Romex and PVC in 1981. and vividly remember the joy he experienced, which how much easier it was than with conduit and cast iron. Interestingly, as most of the country stopped using lead service pipes into homes and buildings in the 1950s, the practice continued until 1995 in Chicago because the plumbers union was able to keep that in the code until the federal government finally forced the city to change it. Happy holidays, FHB crew, Chris in Chicago. That is hilarious. Do you think that's true, gentlemen? Can the unions have that much power over what's allowed in your house?
I had not heard that. I know I had heard from a builder I know who works in the Chicago area that their electrical codes were all, and the reason they used conduit was all based on the fire, the famous fire that took down a good portion of Chicago, and that they were just so worried about fire due to Romex and other types of non-metallic wiring that they went to.
The part about the lead service lines is kind of crazy, right? And that's criminal even.
Yeah. I'm convinced that the making things harder for homeowners is why air admittance valves are not allowed in Minneapolis proper.
Don't get me started on that, because you guys know that bugs me.
Hey, it bugs me too. Yeah. So
just use it and don't say anything.
I may or may not have done that.
Yeah, I'm not going to go there.
Yeah.
This comes from Dale in Boulder, Colorado. Hey guys, as a follow-up to FHB issue 310 in October, here is my endorsement for solar tubes. Who wants to describe what a solar tube is in case one of our listeners might not know?
So essentially, it looks like usually a little dome on your roof that's connected with the super reflective interior pipe to what looks like a light fixture on your ceiling, and it captures sun and brings some sunlight into spaces that don't have access to sunlight.
Dale says, I listened to all your podcasts in the very first episode, and I don't think solar tubes or tubular skylights have been mentioned once as a solution to bring daylight into dark spaces such as hallways. Obviously, they only work for single-story houses or the top floor of a multi-floor house. We have 3, which were installed in our ranch-style home 20 years ago, and they are in great shape with little degradation from the high UV at our 5,200-foot elevation. 2 illuminate hallways, which would otherwise be dark tunnels, and the 3rd is in a bedroom on the north side of the house, which would otherwise be quite dark with only 1 east-facing window. On various podcasts where the topic of interior daytime illumination was discussed, window options and energy efficiency were debated, but I don't recall that less expensive solar tubes were ever mentioned. Well, do you think we've unfairly not talked about solar tubes, Mike?
I think that Dale is just bringing it to our attention, and it gives us a great opportunity to talk about them. And I agree 100% with Dale. I mean, they're useful at getting light into dark spaces, and they're very durable. I've got the house I bought in Arizona has 2 of them into bathrooms, which are interior bathrooms. So there's no opportunity for natural light. But during the day, it is bright as if I had a regular, a big skylight, a big hole in the roof. They were installed 18 years ago, and even in the Arizona sun, there's, like Dale mentioned, there's no appearance of any UV degradation of that little plastic dome. So yeah, they're good. We did an article. I did videos for Fine Homebuilding back. I think it was in 2008. I think I did some videos. There's a series up there. We can put it in the podcast page, a link to that. And I did that on one of my rental houses for what Dale mentioned too, is in dark hallways, and works fantastic.
My parents got one installed. Their bathroom is interior. When they redid their roof last time, so probably 5 years ago, and it's during the day, it's totally lit up, and even during the night at winter when like there's so much reflection of the moonlight off snow and stuff, it's still like totally illuminated. The one caution I would have is I would be hesitant to put one in a bedroom because sometimes you want to sleep during the day, and they are so bright that like it feels like a light is on.
I'm glad you brought that up because one of my customers I put him in for said, how do we turn it off? So here's that situation. And they have dampers that are light dampers, just like the diffuser that's at the bottom. You can purchase call it an option. And so you can swap that out. If somebody's out there and has one of these and wants to turn it off, you just get the diffuser from the same manufacturer that has a little lever on the side, and you just move it, and it will turn the light off.
I think I'd be remiss to the curmudgeonly side of the show to say that the like roof penetration kind of bugs me, and like does it like a normal skylight overheat the room in some instances? No.
The beauty of it is you don't get, at least I haven't noticed a lot of heat transfer. Of course, it is a duct which is running through the building, but I found that I insulate around the pipe where it goes through an uninsulated attic just with some regular jacket insulation, and I haven't noticed any appreciable difference either in raising the temperature or lowering the temperature due to the heat gain or loss. The dome and the flashing are, after I install them, it's almost like a bulletproof installation. It's not like a vent hood that goes out through a roof where you do have a hole where water could come in through that vent hood. Say it's a range hood exhaust or something like that. It's a good wide flange, and if you follow what we did in the video, in the article we did, that was a companion to the video, I think the flashing on it wouldn't be a big issue as far as durability and being leak proof.
Well, I'll have to reconsider those. It always struck me as kind of weird because you still need a light, because there are many times when it's not going to illuminate a hallway, for example, right? It's, but for the reasons you mentioned, it sounds pretty cool.
Well, where I found what happens in a lot of people's homes when they have a dark hallway or a dark bathroom is they flip the light switch on and it stays on all day. And with these...
Who would do such a thing?
Yeah, with these tubular... And it's not such a big deal today with our LED lights. It'll use a bit of electricity, but in the old incandescent days, it cost you $1 a day to run that thing. Whereas with the tubular skylights, that light's on all the time, and then when you do need it at night, it would be just like when your windows don't let your light in at night anyway, because, when you use regular windows, they're not letting light in anyway, so you're going to turn your lights on in a dark room, so works.
Well, I don't know if you guys remember, Tony wrote into the podcast a while back, but... he has a very ambitious remodel going. I think you guys would agree. He wrote in questioning what he should do about his CMU basement wall that was pushed in from soil pressure, water pressure, whatever it was. And he sent some photos of fixing it. And all I can say is... Tony, you are hardcore, and I have great admiration for your work ethic. That must have been a phenomenal undertaking, and good for you, because you're building wealth with your own backbreaking work. So good for you. Did you guys see the photos in the podcast? Yeah.
Yeah, I was impressed that the way the braces he installed to reinforce and straighten out his walls. Usually you just reinforce those block walls that are caving in and you just stabilize them where they are. And he went to the effort of actually trying to push back against the soil pressure, did the excavation on the outside, it sounds like, in order to be able to straighten those walls out. So yeah, big undertaking.
I was going to say, when we were looking at houses, to purchase, like our first few houses, we saw like basements and kind of like some cracking and foundations and all that kind of stuff that scared us away a little bit. But I I talked to actually my old boss at Family Handyman, and he said, like, yes, like that stuff can be scary and they can fail catastrophically, but the fixes for them are usually pretty straightforward and not too expensive. And then the other thing he said is, like, that house has been standing there for 120 years, and so it's like the chances that you're going to buy that house and the foundation is going to fail in a catastrophic way are like super minimal. And I thought that was good advice. Like, that's good for a new potential new homeowner to hear, that sort of advice, like to put things in perspective. Like, you're not dealing with this for the first time ever. Other people who've lived in this home have probably had the same thoughts and concerns.
And it often means the house is a bargain, right? At least percentages off what it would have cost with a perfect foundation.
And it sounds like Tony's house was a bargain too.
Yeah, right.
Just a little over 80,000.
Yeah.
What's that, Mike?
I think he's put in 80,000 to it. What did he spend on it? Did you point that out?
I think he said 80,000 with including the purchase of the house.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I'm going to pick up where he has the wall straightened out, the basement foundation wall. So he excavated, used these braces that connect to the floor system, and he uses a pair of, 2x6s vertically, and pushed the wall back into plumb, mostly, I'm sure, and it looked great. He says, once I had it straightened out, I excavated out so I could install a French drain to a sump pump with a dimpled drainage mat against the CMU wall, allowing water through the wall and straight into the French drain. I built a 2x6 stud wall on 12-inch centers against the wall, anchoring it to the floor and joists above so as to keep the wall from moving in again. The basement has stayed dry ever since, and on really rainy days, you can hear the sump pump doing its job. With the wall straightened, I was able to get the first floor rentable with minor cosmetic work and have had that rented out for going on a year now. Meanwhile, the second floor was originally accessible via an interior staircase as well as an exterior set of stairs. I have closed off the interior stairs and I'm doing a deep energy retrofit on the upstairs. It was all metal lath and plaster, which I removed and opened up the entire space to make a studio apartment. I'm likely going to make it into an Airbnb. I'm doing Bonfig walls and ceiling in some areas that are cathedral, hyperheat Mitsubishi mini splits, DIY PEX manifold. I got a good start on the PEX manifold this evening and have attached a picture of that. That's Tony, I hope we get to meet sometime. He says, I'm just a little in over 80,000 on this second house, but that is everything, including the actual purchase price. I'd like to think I would have finished it up by now, but since my first email, we had a second baby girl, so we have a 4-year-old and 18-month-old girls, and my wife tends to want me home more than across the street working on a rental property. I get that. Eventually, I will likely have 3 rental incomes on this one house. I'll try and do better to send in an occasional email with picture updates. I keep telling myself I could do well with a YouTube channel, but I don't want to take the time to film and then edit everything. I enjoy the show and listen every week. Keep up the good work, guys. Thanks, Tony. Tony, awesome job there. Good for you.
What is a Bonfig wall?
Bonfiglioli.
Jeff was like stunned.
I guess Andrew has not been a regular podcast listener since episode 3, I think, was the first time it was mentioned, right, Jeff?
Something like that, huh?
Yeah.
It's been a regular topic of conversation, Andrew, on the podcast, but in essence, it's putting strips of foam insulation on the studs on the interior and then putting strapping on top of the foam, and the foam layer creates a thermal break. And it seems like a great way to make a high-performance wall affordably, right? With nothing out of the ordinary, like you get to attach your drywall and cabinets the way you would in any other stud wall. It gives you a sheathing layer on the exterior for siding and trim, and it goes together then very much like a normal house.
And so it's something you can retrofit on the inside without touching the outside?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Bonfiglioli, who is a builder in Massachusetts, I forget the town, but kind of near Boston, and he pioneered this building method, and it was a kind of a 3-page afterthought feature in Fine Homebuilding magazine. Because he came up to me at a NESI conference and told me about this wall assembly that he used in his new home builds, and it's generated more interest than nearly anything I can imagine on the podcast and at Fine Homebuilding. Oddly, maybe because it makes so much sense.
And there's untold numbers of people who've read that article over the years and have probably employed it in one fashion or another.
You do sacrifice some floor space, but like you're talking inches, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool.
Tony, thanks for writing back, and please stay in touch. We'd like to see how your rental property progresses, and send some photos of the family too. That'd be great. This was on the. This came from you, Mike. Where did this question come from?
I get about a half dozen to a dozen questions from readers and Instagram followers every week. So I just picked off a few when you said, "Hey, you've got any questions?" And this one, I don't even know who, the person, and it just said, "Hey, I'm having a deck built, and the contractor who's building the deck, so he's a homeowner just having it built. The contractor recommends sloping the deck several inches." This would be inches away, sloping away from the wall of the house, so that, in quotes, water will flow away from the house. And so NextLevel
Still
says,
drunken party gas.
So is this necessary? I'd like to have my deck nice and level.
I might be hanging out with the wrong kind of people. I don't know.
Yeah. But I know when we do patios, concrete patios, the typical installation is you slope the concrete or even a hardscape away from the building just so you get some drainage. Same with soil. But with a deck, since if you've got a conventional deck where you've got gaps between all of the decking boards, and usually the decking boards are running parallel to the wall, you don't really need to slope the deck away from the wall, because as water flows either towards the wall or away from the wall, it's going to drip into that gap and just drop right down to the soil beneath. So putting a slope on it really doesn't give you any benefit. Now, if you were going to put on a membrane deck, like over, there are systems where you actually would install, plywood or OSB over your deck frame, and then you can put a vinyl sheet over it. It's waterproof. In that case, you would want to slope it. But if it's conventional decking where you got gap boards, there's no need to slope the deck frame. And that way you can have everything nice and level.
I think that's crazy, and it's too much. It's like this would give me this would be a red flag for this deck builder. Honestly, I would question their experience, right? This is just this is something that is not done.
Well, but it's one of those things where builders get into their mind, everything has to slope away from the building. So they just project that onto everything they do, which is good. You want the flashing to drain away from the wall, not, have the cap flashing drain, be sloped so it drains away to the surface and not back towards the wall. But then you also have to take in a little logic after that initial impulse to slope things away and think, well, does this really matter?
Well, and remember that people are going to be living in the house and using the deck. If we just followed what would be best for the building, we would probably build things differently if people weren't involved.
As a brief aside, one thing I've observed since my working from home is that my wood decks are stupidly slippery some mornings with frost. And if you slope the deck a couple inches and there was frost on it and you stepped onto it, you would fall on your butt, I am pretty sure. So I just think this is a bad idea.
You could go sledding.
Yeah.
If you want to slope something away from your house, install a slide. It's that simple.
This comes from TJ. I'm renovating a 3-story balloon framed house. There are mortared bricks in each stud bay from the foundation up about 6 inches above the floor level installed as fire blocking. And on the second and third floors, there are bricks from the let-in ledger up the same 6 inches above the floor level. I'm trying to insulate and air seal the house as best I can. Can I safely remove the bricks and mortar and fire block another way? Ideally, I'd like to insulate the walls and not have the bricks preventing me from doing so. I've gutted the inside of the building, so it's fairly easy to chip out the bricks and mortar. Thanks, TJ. Have you guys ever heard of this as a fire blocking method?
I've had to deal with it for my whole career on all these old 3-decker houses that we work on in old mill villages around Rhode Island. And in every floor level to prevent fire from traveling from wall spaces, which typically in old balloon frame walls, those were not insulated back in the late 1800s right on through into the 50s. No insulation, so they're just void cavities where if fire got in down in the basement and you didn't have something to block that fire, and in these cases they would use bricks or mortar, and the fire would all of a sudden erupt in the roof, starting in the basement, and moments later it would be up in the roof rafters. So it became sort of a quasi-code. I don't know if it was officially required or if builders just said, hey, we're going to put bricks in and that stops the fires from traveling into concealed spaces. But you can, to answer the question, you can remove those bricks. We did an article 2 years ago on fire blocking and draft stopping, and it goes through a bunch of conventional details, but the gist of it, which would apply here, is that as long as you can put something at each floor level that would prevent fire from traveling from wall cavities into concealed floor spaces, which is going to occur with balloon frame walls since the joist rest on ledgers, which are alongside of the studs, it could let into the studs. So you can put in insulation. And all that's required by the code to do that is 16 inches of fiberglass above and below each of those interconnections between walls and floors or walls and roofs. So if you insulate your walls with stone wool or with fiberglass, that would qualify. I don't know off the top of my head if spray foam would qualify as a fire blocking material. If it doesn't, I would have to do the research on that. Alternatives would be you can use just solid 2x lumber. So you can just put whatever the depth of that wall cavity is, say it's a 2x5, which was common in a lot of these old houses. Just rip a 5-inch block out of a 2x6, and you can set that in at both the ceiling level and the floor level, and that would satisfy.
We should, I think, clarify that it's important because when you have full dimension lumber or odd dimension lumber, as is typical in this vintage of home, normal dimensional lumber doesn't fit the space. So you have to make something so it fits tight. The tight fitting is the key to this success of this, right?
Yeah, snug fitting. It doesn't have to be like, really, really tight to, you can't slip a piece of paper, and it's just got to be good and snug, fit most of the cavity. And then even 3/4 OSB or 3/4 plywood also suffices to meet the code, as long as there's no joints in it.
I find it tough to fasten if you're using 3/4 stock. It's much easier to use something thicker, I think.
And where I've used 3/4 is when I'm doing modern, I still balloon frame houses in some situations, and we'll run the 3/4 wall, a floor sheathing, and we'll notch it around the studs and push it right through. So there's a few different options to fulfill the need for fire blocking, as well as take out all of the bricks, which are a big thermal bridge.
I'm guessing you can probably put these homes that you're familiar with within a couple decades. I'm sure they are early 20th century, right?
We'll see them from the late 1800s, like 1890s, right on through the mid-40s. Even the late 40s, we'll see these homes. Yeah.
I'm always blown away, like when I look inside something and I see bricks. We're not expecting them. I immediately think there's got to be some like structural reason for these to be there. but like it makes a ton of sense as a fire block, especially if you don't care about thermal bridging. But again, that's kind of like one of the like new homeowner things of like understanding like how your house worked when it was built and how houses work today and how to like bridge that knowledge gap.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because it's the topic of our after show, and I'm guessing that you realized I hadn't mentioned the after show since we started.
I was going to let you off, Patrick, but this is actually an idea Mike came up with, but thinking about the amount of knowledge a new homeowner needs to acquire very quickly within the first year of home ownership as your house goes through all 4 seasons, and talking through like what are some unexpected things, what are some things to keep in mind, all that kind of stuff, and being able to have a good reference and good people to talk to. I feel very lucky to be able to ask Patrick and Mike questions whenever they strike me. So it'll be a really, really fun after show.
Yeah, I think some of the questions that the podcast gets are just Andrew's using a pseudonym and asking all the questions he has about what he doesn't want to bring up and admit that he doesn't know the answer to. And I'm just picking on you.
I'm still, I feel like insulating paint is a thing, guys. It works.
I was thinking about that photograph of that guy's house just the other day with the spray painted ceiling. Oh my God, it's just crazy.
You know, one thing I should qualify the answer that I gave regarding removing those bricks is check with your local building department. If you live in the metropolitan Chicago area, if they're still not allowing PEX tubing and other things, they might not allow you to remove those because of their concern for fire resistance. So, yeah, it may be.
The Masons Union is weighing in on that, is my guess. This is a common question. I've thought it was time that we address it in the podcast. This comes from Tom. I'm looking for detail articles regarding the installation of skylights in an existing cathedral roof/ceiling. The current roof ventilation has even rid vents with about a 2-inch airspace between the top of the insulation and the bottom of the roof sheathing. The skylights will be installed approximately halfway between the eave and ridge. I'm worried the installation of the skylights will totally block the ventilation in each rafter bay. Is blocking the ventilation air a problem? And if so, are there tried and true details for providing airflow through or around the skylight blocked rafter cavities? Many thanks, Tom. And I guess you had some thoughts on this, Mike, because you helped us with a useful link, right?
Yeah, well, this was, there's... So there are different ways to think about this. And there have been lots and lots of installations of skylights where the way the frame of the skylight ends up blocking those rafter bays where the ceiling is a vaulted or ceiling, a cathedral ceiling, so that insulation is within the rafter cavity. So there is no, per se, attic beneath there. And they've been successful. They haven't ended up with moisture problems, with moisture condensing. So, so to answer the short question, which is it a problem? Maybe not. So you could just block them off. And ideally, if you had little windows in your ceiling so you could look up and see if there is any condensation happening, then you'd know if there's a problem or not. Another way to do it, if you do want continuity of ventilation, you can let the air flow laterally to adjacent rafter spaces. In the old days, what we used to do was we drill a few holes through the adjacent rafter.
But near the sheathing, right? We're in that airspace. Yeah.
Yep. But I don't recommend doing that, especially if it's an older roof where the rafters may already be undersized for the span that they're spanning. There are some alternative. There are some products that you can use. They're little. It's like corrugated plastic. DCI Products makes a couple of them. One's called rafter vent and another's called valley vent. And the only extra step would need to be done from the roof when the skylights are getting installed is the installer would have to like jack the roof sheathing up maybe about 3/4 of an inch above the surface of the rafter and then slip these corrugated strips in and then re-nail or screw down the sheathing. They do have tapers on them, so you won't notice this big hump in the sheathing above the surface of the roof plane, but it does raise the roof sheathing a little bit. So if you've got laminated shingles, you won't really notice it because the laminated shingles are kind of, got that heavy dimensional appearance anyway. But if you've got a metal roof or something that's flat surface, like a 3-tab shingle, then you would notice a little bump above and below those skylights where these rafter vents or valley vents were installed.
And the hump doesn't matter because the skylight has step flashing, but what if it had straight flashing? That would present a problem, am I right?
If the taper is so slight and you're only raising up the sheathing maybe 1/2 of an inch to allow for the lateral flow of air, I don't know as it's going to be that dramatic that if you had continuous flashing on the side of the skylight that it's going to be that noticeable or impact the flashing. It's one of those things you got to like do on the fly when you're up there on the roof, and then you start to set the curb in place and see how it's going to work, see if it's going to be a problem or not.
I say don't worry about it because most roof venting doesn't work anyway, and
Yep.
I wouldn't put a skylight in it either, but so there we go.
Unless it's a tubular skylight you can do. That's it. Do a tubular, and then it doesn't take up the whole rafter bay, and you just get the light right in.
When I was selling building materials, one of the crusty old guys who had been there for decades, Mike, he said, "Why would you ruin a perfectly good roof by putting a skylight in it?" I was like, "Because they're cool." And he's like, "There's no skylight as good as roof as far as reliability." And he, like you, Mike, had rental properties, and I'm guessing with northern Vermont's snowy winters, that sometimes he would have clients or tenants with condensation and potential ice damming and all these things that can be exacerbated by, roof penetrations, skylights included. But they are super cool. This comes from another Andrew. Dear FHB podcasters, my name is Andrew. I'm a longtime listener and FHB reader. I appreciate all the work you guys do for the magazine and the podcast. Here's my question if you guys deem it worthy of discussing. I live in Alabama in the Tuscaloosa area. I have a small 20 by 24 foot shop that I rebuilt about 7 years ago. The foundation is from an old welding shop that was my wife's grandfather's that was in the woods about 100 yards from the house. It had been neglected for many years, so I tore down the old masonry block walls till it was 1 course tall. I filled them with concrete and power washed the slab. I rebuilt the walls with 2x6 framing, and with my transit laser was able to get the walls flat on this old unlevel slab. The lumberyard engineered the roof, and with a structural beam, I was able to only need rafters, so inside I have a nice tall ceiling. So I'm guessing he had the lumberyard design a structural ridge, so he wouldn't have to have ceiling joists or collar ties or something like that. I have a nice tall ceiling, 15 foot 6 inches to the bottom of the beam. I've been in construction my whole life. I started as a framer, then finished carpenter, then construction management, and I've recently got back into the field doing hands-on work. With that in mind, I'm endeavoring to get this a more work-oriented space. I've been collecting insulation slowly and would like to insulate and drywall the shop. My question is, what's a safe assembly for a semi-conditioned space in our humid climate? By semi-conditioned, I mean I will probably use a window air conditioner in the summer for now, with the goal of doing a mini split at some point. And I'll use an oil radiant electric heater to take the chill off when necessary in the cold times. My biggest worry is getting a moisture problem. Should I air seal as best as possible, insulate drywall and paint with a nice latex paint? I especially desire input on the ceiling, which will be insulated in a 2x6 with 2x6 thickness insulation. Will this be okay? The roof is currently unvented, but I can easily add a ridge vent and cut vents in the soffit if needed. Sorry for getting wordy. I'm glad I was able to slip in air sealing into my question. Here are a couple pictures of the building. Please excuse the mess. All right, so Andrew sent us a picture of his wood shop, and Andrew, like a lot of us, looks like he's got a whole mess of projects in progress, right? And his shop is now among them. What do you think? So you need a drywall air barrier and insulation, right? Just like any other space, yeah.
In the mixed climate that he's in, mixed hot, humid, it's always best to let the walls be able to let the moisture move from the outside to the inside and the inside to the outside. In other words, you don't want any blocks at all. As far as vapor retarders, the latex paint on the inside will be perfect. And that'll allow, if there's a lot of humidity on the outside, and in the summer when your air conditioning, it'll allow a little bit of moisture to move through. Probably won't have any condensation because there's only going to be a couple of months that you'll be air conditioning it. And you probably won't be air conditioning it all the time, as you noted in the description. As far as the roof goes, Tuscaloosa is in climate zone 3. And in climate zones 1, 2, and 3, you are now in the building code, model building code, allowed to use.
What cycle, Mike? What year are we talking?
I think it was the 18 code that it came up, and what we're now allowed to do in those climate zones is vapor diffusion ports. It's a system where you can actually fill your entire rafter cavities with fibrous insulation, drywall on the underside and roofing on the top, so you don't have any ventilation space. You don't provide any intake or exhaust ventilation as you would ordinarily think of in northern climates where you have a soffit vent and then a ridge vent. But what you would do is at the ridge, and ridge alone, is you put in a vapor diffusion port. So we've got a couple of links to some articles, one from Green Building Advisor and another from Building Science Corporation, where the research was done by Joe Stiebrick and his other people who work there at Building Science Corporation. And a vapor diffusion port it looks kind of like a ridge vent, but you cut the slot in the roof sheathing, but instead of putting the ridge vent down over the slot directly, you put a vapor permeable material. It could be as simple as a piece of house wrap that you then tape or seal to your roofing material. So that would go over the vent slot, and then you put the ridge vent on top. And the whole idea there is that any moisture vapor that gets into that insulation moving from the inside up or the top side down, that vapor will go to, depending on the climatic conditions inside or outside of the building, when it's a little drier, perhaps in the fall, winter, early spring there in Tuscaloosa, any vapor that's accumulated in the insulation would just by diffusion make its way up and out the path of least resistance to the atmosphere, which would be through that house wrap material that's over that slot in the ridge. Research that they're doing currently may, and Coda mentioned this in one of the, I think we did a Fine Homebuilding Summit a couple years ago during the pandemic. What was that? The fall of 2020, I think. And I remember listening in to one of his presentations, and he said, yeah, we can do it in northern climates, but we're afraid that it's so installer, the installers would have to do it really, really well. Whereas down in climate zones 1, 2, and 3, even if somebody did a crappy job installing this vapor diffusion port, it won't succumb to causing a problem with a condensation on the roof sheathing. And that's the concern in northern climates. If you don't do the vapor diffusion port properly, you could end up with a problem. So It's still under investigations in climate zones 4, 5, 6, and beyond, but in 1, 2, and 3, where Tuscaloosa is, vapor diffusion port. So for this situation, for Andrew, just insulate those 2x6s with full insulation, put a vapor diffusion port on top, and you're good to go.
I'm going to say, Andrew, listen to Mike. And if you don't, put one of those hobo data loggers up in the rafter space near the ridge and just keep an eye on the moisture levels inside the attic. Because this is something you could add later if it proved to be a problem, or you could just wait till it was a problem and not do it, right?
And I think even though
go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead. Even though you're in a humid climate, the humidity is probably not going to cause a problem. So I guess that was the way I want to summarize that. Go ahead, Andrew.
So Glenn Matthewson actually wrote about vapor diffusion ports. I think in an issue that is just being put on the web now for the code section. But that was the first time I'd seen that mentioned. And the science looks right, especially in a less risky climate zone. I wanted to talk about workshop walls, and I like being able to attach things to the walls in my workshop wherever I want to, and so I'm inclined to clad my walls with plywood or OSB. I actually one of my buddies, when he was doing his shop, did T111, and it like looks cool alongside being very, very functional. Could you get away with putting plywood on these walls and not doing OSB or not doing drywall?
I'm sure you could. The risk is if you don't have a good air barrier, you're going to be wasting cooling dollars for a minimum. And, potentially if you have outdoor air leaking in also, you could be creating, condensing surfaces where those panels meet or where they are touching the ceiling or the floor or whatever. So you have to detail those panels, I think, as an air barrier to have a reliable assembly. But, let's keep in mind that Tuscaloosa, compared to many places, is probably pretty forgiving if you're going to run an air conditioner at least some of the time, because it's going to help dry things out. And as I point out sometimes on the podcast, like, where's the moisture coming from? If Andrew had, a dozen 50-gallon fish tanks in this shed instead of woodworking machinery, I would say there's a greater risk, but, it seems pretty safe.
I'd also like to ask you, Patrick, because you've previously mentioned you don't think roof venting works. How do you feel about vapor diffusion ports?
I think it's wacky, frankly, but science is science. So if it's been demonstrated to work, I can't argue with that. But the genesis of the diffusion port was this phenomenon where dense packed rafter bays have seasonal moisture buildup, and someone described it, it was probably Joe, as ping pong moisture, where it wants to move through the insulation seasonally, like where it accumulates. And theoretically, at the right time of year, it's at the top of the roof. You put the diffusion retarder because the moisture is going to move from more to less. So even if you have a bunch of moisture at the top of the ridge, it's going to find its way out because now it's drier on the outside of the diffusion port. So I don't know. Makes me want one.
When I first heard the term, I was like, oh, this sounds like super complicated and like a thing. And then I was like, oh, you're just putting this material over your vent before you put your vent down. So I take umbrage with what we call it, I guess, more than anything.
Because we give it a highfalutin name like vapor diffusion port? Yeah. Well, I think that when Joe came up with this, I think he tempered it with the highfalutin nature of that term with the ping pong moisture part of it.
Right,
so he got both sides of his both science side and his humor side in.
Yeah, we could call it a ping pong port or something, right?
What I find interesting is I had the recent pleasure to talk to an engineer, and he reminded us that, a lot of engineering is writing reports and technical papers, right? And sometimes you have to come up with the names for things you're observing or the solutions to the problems. And I think that would be one of the best jobs of being an engineer is you get to name the solution or the problem.
Or you just use your last name and we call it a Bonfig wall.
That show was so good.
That was a good catch.
Well, I'd like to remind everyone to stay tuned for our podcast after show. Even if you are not a new homeowner, I'm hoping you can weigh in with what you think folks might be able to do to make new ownership easier for those who are, and advice you would give new homeowners if we failed to hit the mark. So please stick around for that discussion. It's been great talking to you guys. It's been nice spending an hour. It goes by so quick.
As always.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Jeff, Andrew, and Mike for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thank you very much for listening.